Hello everyone, today I'm bringing you guys a highly requested video. We're going to be talking about solo lane matchups. This is a video that I've been pretty reluctant to make for many reasons. One, there's just so much information to go over and there's so many different gods and matchups that you have to worry about, which is why I'm going to separate it into different parts. The video I'm going to separate into different parts. And then also the information is just so valuable for like my opponents in SPL. If I say that this is like a really good matchup and an opponent knows that, then they know they can ban against it easier and, all that stuff. So that's kind of why I've been reluctant to make it, but I decided, I don't know, I just wanted to make it. It'd be a fun video, and I think it'll help out a lot of people when it comes to solo lane, or at least for, just like a basis when it comes to picking and banning and deciding what to pick into certain gods and, not just picking blind and ended up, because a lot of people will lose a game and they'll think that they just played horribly, but matchups are really important in Smite, right? So it's possible that it was just a bad matchup and they didn't know of it, and maybe they learned something from it afterwards. So what I've done for this video is, the first video we're going to be talking about Achilles to Hercules. So we're just going through the warriors right now. We're at Achilles, and then we're going to go all the way to Hercules. And we're using SmiteTierList.com. It's a really cool website, and what I've already done is I've already put the matchups in the tiers for us before I started the video. That way I don't have to do it on the fly and talk about everything on the fly, and it will just be a lot more organized and a lot easier. And another thing that we can do is, for anybody that wants to have this reference for later, for when they're picking and banning or anything like that, you can go through the video and find the timestamps where I have the entire page already set. So say you're a Hercules one trick and you really want to know every single one of his matchups, or at least have a better understanding of them, you can screenshot this or save it and then have it ready for when you're playing your Hercules, and you can kind of pick and ban around it, right? So that's what we're going to be doing, and we're going to be starting off with Achilles and going on the way to Hercules. And yeah, what I've done is I've also organized it into good matchups, bad matchups, and 50-50 matchups. So obviously good matchups are the matchups that you'd want to play Achilles into. Bad matchups are the matchups you would not want to play Achilles into, that you would do pretty poorly in. And then 50-50 is more jungler dependent. It depends on how good your opponent is and how good you are. Obviously skill is going to be a very big component no matter what the matchup is, even if it's a horrible or a good matchup. But these are just a little bit closer, and they rely more on the team, and that's why, Smite is a team game. It's a conquest. The conquest map is obviously very team reliant, so that's where these gods will fall into when it becomes one of those closer matchups. I'm not going to go over every single matchup because, like I said, there's just so much information to go over. I'm just going to kind of give you a general sense of why I have gods where they are, and something to keep in mind is that matchups can change from patch to patch because things are constantly being changed. I always talk about this. Items can change matchups. God changes can change matchups pretty easily. So I kind of just want to give you the reasoning behind it so you can kind of think for yourself and theorycraft in the future for matchups, especially for the gods that we talk about. So Achilles specifically, starting out with him, Achilles has a pretty weak early game because his clear is really bad. He can fight really well because his poke with his extra power he gets from his passive is nice, so he can auto people down and kind of auto cancel with his 3 and his 1 really well, but his clear is really bad. So the matchups where he's going to have a really hard time clearing the wave because the enemy god has a really easy time clearing the wave, and the matchups where they kind of just outscale him going into the late game and get kind of a free laning phase are going to be the bad matchups for him. So the good matchups are the ones that don't really, they don't out clear him that hard. They can't really bully him because they don't out auto trade him that hard. Besides Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn's the only exception in all of these. The reason it's a good matchup for Achilles against Cuchulainn is that it's really, really, really hard to avoid either the dash or the stun from Achilles as Cuchulainn. You can't really jump it and react in time. You're either going to jump in, he's not going to use his stun or his 3, and then you're going to get hit by the other. And then if you do use your jump early on for those abilities, if he just pokes you down with all of his damage that he has, he can get a free execute because you're not going to be able to have your jump up for it. So traditionally speaking, this is just a pretty bad matchup for Cuchulainn, which is weird because you would think that Cuchulainn would bully Achilles' early game because, Cuchulainn's early game is really, really strong, and Achilles really isn't that strong. Which does happen a little bit. You will put Achilles a little bit behind in gold, but once he gets the Glad Shield and the boots online, this is a really hard matchup to deal with for Cuchulainn, and Achilles will win it most of the time. All these other ones don't really bully him that hard and will also kind of get bullied by him, especially once he gets his Glad Shield online. They kind of have to sit in the wave, which means he gets free 3s and free stuns off. Maybe he can interrupt certain things, like you can interrupt Fenrir Brutalize, you can interrupt him on a dash with your 1. He kind of just can kill these tanks with his executes and bully them early game. Then all these ones in the middle, I would say that a lot of these matchups he actually does fine into, but the problem with just doing fine is that some characters scale harder than you, right? Like Baron's going to do a little bit more than you late game. Athena might do a little bit more than you late game. Nike's definitely going to do more than you late game. And the problem is you don't bully these characters enough as Achilles that they're going to be behind going to the late game for the most part. So they're just going to scale a lot harder than you as Achilles. There's certain things like, oh, you can interrupt Surge Stun, but it doesn't really matter because he steals your healing. Athena, you're going to bully early on, but she's going to be able to out-rotate you really hard. Hades is going to push you under tower very early in the game, but then you have your execute for him in the team fight. So there's little things that make these matchups kind of like 50-50. And then the bad matchups, all of these matchups, you just get bullied really hard. Not even just in the early game when it comes to like clearing the wave, but like characters like Osiris, Kama, Ardeo will literally just out-trade you and make it really hard for you to do what you want to do. Camazotz is kind of similar to Kukulkan, where it's hard to jump the Achilles 3 or the Achilles stun, and if you do jump it, it's going to be really hard for him. Well, he won't be able to get the second hit of his dash, which is really a big deal, and then or he won't get the stun off, and then he can't auto you for like 3 seconds, or not 3 seconds, but for like 3 autos, where you're not going to be able to do anything about it. But the difference between Kama and Kukulkan in that regard is that Kama has so much sustain and so much like trade potential outside of that with all of his damaging abilities and his lifesteal passive and everything like that, that it doesn't even matter if you don't avoid it. You're just going to out trade and out sustain Achilles pretty hard in that matchup and get bullied for it. Chang'e is going to heal the wave, make it really hard for you to clear. She's going to anti-heal your heals. She's going to be bullying you early on. She's going to have meditation, so she can heal your executes and med her team when they're trying to get executed. Just a pretty bad matchup. Jing Ten Sobek kind of just get a free laning phase. You're not going to really execute him all that much in team fights. Maybe Sobek you will a little bit, but his anti-heal and everything is going to be just as good against you in team fights. Osiris destroys you. Set gets a free laning phase for the most part, and kind of just gets to that mid game where he'll be a monster. So that is Achilles at the first spot, I guess you could say. And Amaterasu's up next. We're going in alphabetical order. Go full screen for this. So Ama's a character that has traditionally speaking, or at least in the past, historically, Amaterasu had a pretty weak early game, but I think a year ago or something like that, they buffed her too, so it does a crazy amount of damage level 1. You guys always hear me talk about that. So she actually isn't really that bad in lane anymore. She actually can be a bully and can outtrade people that she otherwise really wouldn't be able to, like, like a King Arthur or like a Bologna or like a Mulan. Early game really isn't that bad. But at the end of the day, she's still a mid to late game character. She's one of the best team fighting warriors in the game. So any character that will make it really hard for her to get to that point by just bullying her super hard is going to be a bad matchup for her. Any character that kind of just gives her a free laning phase or she can bully really hard is going to be a good matchup. And then the characters that are in the middle that maybe scale just as hard as her and also bully her, but kind of depend on their jungler or anything like that, then they're going to be in the middle. So for good matchups, the cripple field from Ardeo really isn't getting that much value against Ama. Ama's going to be able to run down Ardeo really hard with her silence. She can interrupt the 3. She can run her down because she has no CC immunity. Pretty good matchup. Same thing with Baron, just runs him down really hard, can avoid his root and his heal. All of these other warrior matchups, she kind of just bullies, to be honest. She silences some key ability, silences the Erlang 3, silences the Nike 1, the 2. Same thing with Wukong 3, Vamana Dash. All that she can silence really well. She can chase them really well. She has good sustain to match a lot of their poke, and can kind of just get a free laning phase to that mid to late game. All these in the middle, I would say there's certain matchups like Sobek is going to bully you pretty hard in lane, but he's also going to kind of give you a free lane to the mid to late game, which is where you want to be as Ama. But the problem is he can bully you a little bit and set up for ganks pretty well. Arthur is going to be winning the 1v1 straight up, like he's just better in the 1v1 like he is in most matchups. But the thing is, Ama's one of the few characters that can like deal with his poke and his damage and kind of keep up with sustain. Same thing with Chang'e. Chang'e's going to bully you early on, but she's not going to bully you so hard that you're going to be so far behind and not make it to the mid to late game for the most part. Plus, you can run her down really, really hard in team fights, so you'll start to counter her as the game goes on. You can't get out of Odin Cage, so that's a little bit rough, but you will bully him early on. Mulan's a really close matchup, I would say, with Ama and Mulan. Mulan's extremely early game. Ama's a little bit early game, but more focused towards that late game. So Mulan will win it a little bit early on in the game, but if you play it correctly, you should be able to keep up and sustain everything like that and make it to mid game. The bad matchups, like I said, these are the characters that are going to make it so hard for you to get to the late game. Tyr, you might not expect it, but Tyr is actually really good in Ama because as Ama, you really have to sit in the wave with your 2 when you're clearing. And Tyr loves that because he can Fearless you plus the wave, group it all up, and just be a huge general nuisance. Tyr keeps up with your healing and everything like that, so pretty bad matchup. All these other matchups are pretty bad as well because it's just going to be really hard for you to get to that mid to late game. You're going to get bullied really hard. You're standing in the way, so Achilles is going to get a lot of value. Same thing with Kama, same thing with Cuchulainn and Herc and Osiris. All of them are going to out-trade you, probably like levels 1 to 8. Pretty hard, I would say. And then if you don't like stall the lane as much as possible, then they're gonna snowball on you pretty hard and make it to that mid game much faster than you would, maybe 2 or 3 levels ahead and a decent amount of gold ahead. Again, it doesn't mean that these matches are unplayable, especially if there's a skill difference where you're just a better player than like a Hercules player and you do more than him. But if you're playing against somebody who knows what they're doing and they're basically equal skill level, these matchups are gonna be pretty hard for you to play against, and it's gonna be hard for you to get to that late game. Bellona is up next. So the thing with Bellona is that she's a pretty lane dominant god, or at least that's where she like plays for. She kind of falls off mid to late, and there's a lot of matchups. There's a lot of matchups right now that she just doesn't really bully, and she honestly just gets bullied in. So the good matchups she can actually keep up and sustain and poke with Kama, because Kama relies on his auto attacks a lot of the time for trading in lane. So Bellona's pretty good against that and keeps up in the sustain. Obviously good against Erlang, can interrupt his abilities with her ult and her disarm. Obviously his one won't get as much value if you disarm it or block it. Same with Odin. Odin, you're just going to push under tower, and you're always going to be able to get out of his cage with your ult. You're going to bully him pretty hard, honestly, and the same thing with Vamana. You're going to bully pretty hard. Vamana also relies on auto attacks for a lot of his damage when it comes to just like 1v1ing. So you're just going to be able to out-trade him in that regard. All of these other matchups, I would say she does fine into, but the problem with these matchups is that she falls off hard late game, so that's why I say it's 50-50. If you do decent and you play around with your jungler and you guys invade blues with the pressure you get from Bellona, then she can win a lot of these matchups and do well into. But the problem is that drop-off is just kind of insane when it comes to her kit and everything like that. And even if these characters are a little bit behind, I honestly feel like they're just going to do a little bit more than you will in team fights. And on all these bad matchups, she doesn't bully. And like, for example, against Hades and Arthur, she gets bullied pretty hard. Same thing with Mulan. She can do fine into him because she can kind of survive, but surviving as a Bellona really is not worth it, right? You're just going to, like I said, you're going to drop off eventually, and you're going to be a little bit behind as a character that kind of wants to be only ahead, right? So all these matchups, I think she kind of gets either bullied in or doesn't bully hard enough where they'll just get a free like late games. For example, like Sobek, Nike, and even Zhang, she won't bully hard enough, and they'll just get to that mid to late game where they'll be doing a lot more in the team fights and actually, impacting the game a lot more. Chalk is up next. So the weird thing about Chalk is that you can kind of play Chalk in any single matchup, man. I mean, he's just kind of like the anti-bully. And sometimes he can even bully people just because he has so much sustain and so much range poke with his cooldowns and everything like that. So you could honestly play him into any matchup, but he does have some bad matchups. All the typical bully characters like Osiris, Kama, Arthur, Mulan, even Amma, they're going to bully him early game and just scale harder, a little bit harder than him mid to late because Chalk does fall off a decent amount. Most warriors do, to be honest. But so all these characters are going to bully him early on. However, he also can bully some characters that you wouldn't expect. Like, I think he can bully Achilles. I think he can bully Cuchulainn, Tyr, like, some characters that are actually pretty lane dominant. Jorm even. The problem is how much can you bully them as Chalk, right? If you can't bully them to the point where they're like 1k behind or really, really far behind, then you're just going to fall off, and it's possible that they maybe scale harder than you. Like, Cuchulainn, I think, is going to do a lot more than a Chalk in the late game. A Jorm with like a full damage build, not a full damage build, but like mostly damage build will do a little bit more than you, I think. And same thing with like Vamana. Vamana's going to be able to run people down and all that. So even though it's a good matchup, and some of these matchups are pretty good, you got to be careful of them just outscaling you. But going through the good matchups, Ardeo Cripple doesn't really get any value against Chalk, so you can kind of just bully her. The slow is really potent against her. It's really potent against Achilles. You can interrupt Vamana's dash with your ultimate, so he's going to always have to ult that, so you're just trading ult for ult, which is good for you because Vamana ult's a little bit more valuable. And yeah, these other characters, they kind of also have to sit in the wave when they're doing their stuff, so you get a ton of value out of your 1-2 combo on Chalk, right? All of these characters want to walk up to the wave and hit it. And if they're in the middle of the wave, then, well, you get a free 1-2 combo. And also Chalk's sustain is really, really good. So like I said before, he can kind of play into any lane and do fine. The problem is you fall off, and you don't want to be just doing fine as a Chalk warrior, So that is Chalk. On to Cuchulainn. So a general rule of thumb is that if you've noticed, the less bad matchups a character has, the more likely that they're just a good character that you see a lot right now. So, for example, Cuchulainn, I think, is in a really, really good spot right now. I've been spamming him in the SPL, if you've seen. And, I mean, you can kind of tell based on how I have his matchups. He only has 4 really bad matchups that I can think of. And even then, like, they're not even that bad. Like, you can play into them perfectly fine if you know how to. But... so that is just like a trend that you can kind of see. The more bad matchups a character has, the more likely that they're not that viable. For example, like Bellona, I don't think is really that viable right now, and she has a ton of bad matchups that I don't like to play into. So Cuchulainn has a ton of good matchups, man. I mean, he doesn't really fall off that hard, especially if you go like Tank Boots build on him with like Void Shield. He does a lot in the late game team fights with his AoE abilities, with his ultimate in both stances. All of these matchups he's going to bully early on because Cuchulainn transforming at level 2, every single one of these characters he will bully under their tower. The only ones maybe not so much is Jorm, but the reason that Cuchulainn is a good matchup into Jorm is because Jorm stacks his rage really, really fast with his autos from his breath. All of these others, he either bullies really hard so he can just get them really, really far behind, or he bullies them hard enough where even if they kind of get to the late game, Cuchullainn's late game will just be just as good, or at least not too far behind. So you're willing to take that bet and pick Cuchulainn into them most of the time. These other matchups, he can kind of get bullied by, King Arthur with a little bit of a jungle pressure, Mulan with jungle pressure, Hades with jungle pressure. Hades, even without jungle pressure, is going to push Cuchulainn under tower even early on. Same thing with Cuchulainn, Chang'e. All these gods can push him under tower and also just bully him when it comes to the straight up fights. The only thing is it's kind of, it kind of depends on the junglers as well. Like if a jungler comes and ganks a Hades at like level 4, level 5, you get a kill and then you get a bit of a lead, and as Cuchulainn against Hades, you're going to start bullying him really hard. So, and then as far as the bad matchups, these characters just out-trade Cuchulainn, to be honest. Hercules passive gets so much value against Cuchulainn. He basically always has it stacks, especially when it comes to rage. So Herc can even out-trade him in his rage form, which is pretty insane. We talked about Achilles matchup before. Camazotz, you're sitting in the wave as Cuchulainn and you have no sustain apart from Glad Shield, whereas Camazotz has a crap ton of sustain, just so much sustain. So he'll just out trade you really hard with his sustain. And then Osiris, he can kind of just run you down, especially if you're jumping the waves. He's going to be able to just like slow you and use his mitigation to his advantage. If he knows that if you're Cuchulainn and you start your transformation and go on Osiris, he can just tether a lot of that damage and get a lot of value out of that. And your ult is also going to be, the Osiris ult is going to be on a lower cooldown than the Cuchulainn ult, so he can kind of trade his ults when he's trading with you, especially if Cuchulainn has Glad Shield and he's not going to be healing as much from the anti-heal. So, these bullies will do well into Cuchulainn, but even then, you can play Cuchulainn fine into those. So Erlang, this is a little bit weird, but I'm doing it on purpose. Erlang, I don't have anything set because, to be honest, almost every matchup is bad for Erlang in solo right now. I think he's in a terrible spot. I think he's pretty much only viable as a jungler or as a support. There are a lot of matchups that are also 50-50, that it's kind of skill dependent and that you can bully if you get like jungler pressure or if the other person isn't really that good. But for the most part, I just think most of his matchups are bad right now. He's just a bad character. I don't recommend playing him in solo. And because of that, I don't have anything set for him. Oops. Moving on to Guan Yu. Guan Yizzle up next. So Guan Yu's a character that wants to get towards that mid to late game. Not so much the late game. Guan actually falls off late game. He gets stronger in the mid game because he can heal his teammates and kind of play around objectives really well. He still gets really good value out of his ultimate because he can run people down without them shredding him because they don't have all their items yet. But that's why I also say that he falls off late game, because if you ever ult in a late game scenario as Guan Yu, you guys know it. If they have their tank shredding items online, they have their 6 item slots or whatever, and they just start hitting you while you're in your ult, you will just die. You're not going to get any value out of your ult. Sometimes you have to instant cancel it just for a quick stun. So really kind of just falls off hard late game. Not going to get as much value out of your 3 because it's going to be interrupted, or you're just going to be DPS'd during it, and you're really just like a heal and slow bot for the most part. So his strength is his mid game. So any character that allows him to get to that mid game where he can carry, he's going to do well into. And any character that kind of just eats the entire Talu Assault mid or early to mid, because Talu Assault does a lot of damage, and if you can't interrupt it, then you will get shredded by it. And all these characters, if you notice, for the most part, can't interrupt it. Obviously, Wukong can Tiger it, Terra can 2 it, but it's pretty easy to avoid those. And they also, like, for example, Ardio doesn't get really any cripple value. The knockup immunity from Guan Yu is going to be really good against some of these characters like Vamana Dash, Wukong Dash, Geb knockup, stuff like that. Really good matchup into Baron just because you can run him down super hard. You can always avoid his root into 2-1 combo just because you can 2 it. And the cool thing about Guan Yu too is that it's root immune. So if a character has like a root like Baron and you 2 it, then you'll be able to just like walk away. Although sometimes Baron's 3 is considered like a slow to root, which is like its own CC because Smite likes to be confusing. So whatever, you get the point. It's also root immune is what I'm trying to say. So pretty nice. So yeah, all these matchups he can get to the mid game for free basically in. A lot of these matchups he can also get to the mid game in, but they'll be just as strong as him, or they'll get bullied really hard. A lot of people like playing Guan Yu into King Arthur just because you can have that sustain from your 1 to kind of match all of his poke from his Glad Shield and his 18 abilities that he has. I don't really like it, but it is a 50-50 matchup in my opinion, and a jungler pressure will help with that. Another cool thing about Guan Yu into Arthur is that if you ever get a gank, you can just go into your Guan Yu ult and just literally just hit the Arthur with all hits of it, get a ton of damage off, and he really won't be able to do anything against you while you're in your ult. These other matchups he can also either bully or get bullied by, like Zhang Kui I think can bully Guan Yu, but he can also get bullied if he can just start running him down because he's gotten jungle pressure, or maybe he stole a blue buff or something like that. So very 50-50. And then the rest of these matchups, this is why Guan Yu isn't very viable. He just has so many bad matchups. Look at all of these. There's a couple that he could probably survive in, like even though Ama can silence your Guan Yu 3, like you could probably survive in it and be fine, but Ama's late game is really strong, so it's like surviving isn't that great against her. And the same thing with like same thing with like Achilles. He can interrupt your 3 and be a general nuisance against you, but you could get to that mid-game stage where you're healing for executes and stuff like that. But honestly, just most of these matchups are really bad for Guan. He's going to get bullied pretty hard, either because they're interrupting his 3 or they just out-sustain him really, really hard, or just out-damage him so hard. And for the most part, the reason they out-damage him is because they can interrupt his 3 and he won't get any value out of it. And most of these characters are just general bully characters that do well in most matchups, but because Guan Yu does not like to get bullied and wants to get to that mid game without being too far behind, a lot of these characters are just really strong into him. So that is Guan Yu. And last but not least, we'll have Hercules. Hercules! I love Hercules. He's one of my favorite characters. And you'll notice that he actually does well into a lot of matchups, even bully characters. He's kind of an anti-bully as well, kind of like Chalk. We talked about it before, like for example, Kokolin kind of gets owned by Hercules just because Kokolin wants to play at your tower line, can get pulled into tower really easily by Hercules. Obviously, that's a mistake, but it's a pretty easy mistake to make as the Kokolin. Also, you're just stacking the Herc passive and just making it so easy for him to just out-trade you. All these other matchups, he interrupts their abilities. If they sit in the wave, he can push them plus the wave. You get a ton of value out of that. He can ult the wave plus them and get a ton of value. So that's why he does well into most of these characters. He can interrupt a lot of these abilities. He can interrupt Terra Dashes, Vamana Dash, Guan Yu 3, Erlang 3, all that stuff with his stun. Very, very good for that reason. These other matchups, I honestly think he could do well into all of these matchups. Some people think Osiris is really good into Hercules, and I would say as a general rule of thumb that yes, pick Osiris into Herc and you'll anti-heal him and be really good. But if you're playing against a good Hercules, I actually don't really like this matchup too much as Osiris, just because you want to play at the tower line super hard, and you don't have you don't really have a way to instantly get out of the Herc 2-1 combo, especially in team fights. You have to ult out every single time. It's kind of similar to why Baron is a really good matchup into Osiris. So if you put Osiris out of position instantly, it's really hard for him to get to where he wants to be, just because he always has to use that long cooldown from his ultimate on it. So yeah, I think Herc can do well into all these matchups, but again, it kind of depends on jungler pressure. A good Achilles is going to bully you pretty hard if you lose a blue buff or the jungler ganks at a wrong time and you're not aware of it. Same thing with Zhang. I think this matchup can go back and forth when it comes to Zhang and Hercules. But yeah, just kind of depends on other things. And then these matchups down here, Herc basically can't bully. Like Herc can't bully an Arthur. He can't bully a Sobek. He can't bully a Chang'e. He can't even really bully a Geb, to be honest. And Artio, in fact, will bully Hercules really, really hard because she can just always have her cripple up for his 2-1 combo on the wave or on her, and then she'll just out-sustain him because of all of her sustain. Some of these matchups won't get bullied and will also outscale him pretty hard, like Jingten, Sobek, Baron. I think all these characters, Baron specifically, will do really well into Herc because it's really hard for Herc to get out of Baron's ultimate, and he has to use his 1 to clear the wave almost always. Herc does, so unless you have Golden Blade or Mystical Mail or something crazy like that. So Baron can kind of always get value out of his 3-2-1 combo, can kind of always confirm it. Hades will push Hercules under tower early game, make it really hard for him to get gold and his XP and everything. Well, not XP, but gold, and then eventually it could be XP based on the pathing from Hades and everything like that. And, just a general thumb, most of these characters either bully him, like Chang'e does bully him, or they just outscale him really hard and they don't really get bullied. So, yeah, that will be Hercules' bad matchups. And that is it for the first, what is that, 7 characters? Or 8 characters? Well, I just went halfway through the warriors, basically. So, just a quick run through. I'm going to just go through each one. So, if you want to pause the video and have it here for like a screenshot or anything like that, you can do that. Chalk, Colin, Erlang. I know Erlang, that's pretty troll, but I'm sorry, he's just a bad god. Guan Yu, bad god in solo. I think he's fine in jungle, mainly. And last but not least, Hercules. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, please let me know. There's a lot of information to go over. I try to just give you like basically a rough draft of matchups and where to start with them and how to think about it and all that, just so you're not completely, I guess, blind going into picks and bans when it comes to trying to grind ranked and trying to become a better player in solo lane. So yep, that is it. If we get to 1,000 likes, I'll drop the next. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I'm just jerking your guys' jimmies. I'll probably release the second part of this pretty soon. You know, the off time right now in the SPL is giving me some free time to make some content. And with the format like this, I think it's actually a pretty easy video to make. Just a lot of, like I said, a lot of information to go over. We only went over like, what, 7 or 8 gods, and this is a 30-minute video basically. So I could shorten it, but again, there's just too much information. So I hope you guys appreciated the video, enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions, please let me know. Again, I mean, matchups are very skill dependent, so you got to take this with a grain of salt. But definitely use this guide to kind of get a basis for when it comes to solo lane matchups. So yeah, I'll catch you guys later. See you in the next video. Peace out. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye bye.